Okay, so we are back on the Moto Cheapie Moped cheap pit bike build, whatever you want to call it. And in the previous episode, we had a look at building some jigs using a CAD model and basically getting the frame in the right position to be able to, make sure the geometry and the handling is good. But next up, we are going to look at the subframe, look at the shock positioning, as well as trying to get this thing fired up. So let's jump straight back in. So here I am mounting the shock onto the swing arm and finding out the ideal position for the shock tab. So after drawing this up in CAD, it was time to print it out on a piece of paper and transfer that to a sheet of 6mm steel. Okay, so next up I need to start building a subframe on this bike, and to do that I'm going to use the plastics and tank and try and sort of position them in place. I've got this bracket which I hacked off the previous frame which we stole the head tube, which is the tank mount, so I'm going to try and reuse that and get it somewhat positioned, and then position the plastics and seat in place. And then from there try and build in a subframe. But I'm a complete novice when it comes to working with steel, so this is going to be interesting. I'm going to try a couple of tack welds, which is also, I'm hoping not to blow a hole through the frame. So yeah, let's see how this goes. So this is me attempting to arc weld. As you can see, I'm not doing the best job. Luckily, I bought a MIG welder soon after this, and that made things much easier. So after getting the tank mount in position, it was time to build a jig to get the rest of the plastics in the right place. I took a couple measurements just to make sure that the distance between the foot pegs and the top of the seat were somewhat similar to that of my CRF 110. I had to build a small brace for the tank, as the tank does not sit on the top tube of this frame. Next up was the actual subframe build. Here I am in CAD calculating a couple angles and getting my paper templates right. So initially I wanted to go with this route, which was to weld on these little round tabs and then have them connected to these metal bars which run underneath the seat. But I've decided against it. I've actually gone and fabricated a bunch of sort of angular subframe bars. So I'm going to go ahead and rip off these little bars and actually just mock test fit the new subframe design. So I decided to make the rest of the subframe as a single unit and then move it onto the main frame. We marked up a little jig on the table just to make sure our alignment was all good.
Cheers, Dad.
Cheers, bro.
What is this camera from?
Yeah. Cheers. So after finalizing the subframe, it was time to mate it to the main frame. Next up, I added the two lower members of the subframe. I then tacked on the shock tabs that I made earlier. So at this point I decided to just do a quick check and make sure that the swing arm doesn't interfere with the subframe on full suspension travel. I needed to make some tabs next to make sure that the plastics all lined up and I could mount them to the subframe. So at this point it started to look like an actual motorcycle. Super exciting. Okay, so I've already invested quite a bit of time into this build, but I still have no idea whether that engine is actually going to run. So I think the best idea would be to clean the carb, see if I can wire up something temporarily and just see if it starts, because it's going to be a bit of a disaster if this engine actually doesn't run and I spent all this time building the frame so far. Seems like our starter motor is stuck. We've got a battery and some loose wiring, but we can't seem to get anything to turn over here. Starter motor seems to be dead. So it was at this point that we decided it was time to give it a kick and see, and to our surprise it runs, but it doesn't run very well. You'll see shortly why. Oh shit, son! Oh my god, it's smoke! Thankfully, we have a good friend, Andrew Liebenberg, who we'll see next, who came to the rescue. He's an expert at rebuilding really terrible motorcycles and happens to also be the guy who started the Moto Cheapie event. Andrew also brought us a few gifts to get our bike running a little better, and found some ways to use Chinese generic parts to keep us within the budget.
I brought things.
This is Andrew Liebenberg, the owner of Moto Cheapie, bringing us gifts
I
for
thought
our
I'd
bike.
bring you things. So I brought you a piston. I brought you a rectifier. I brought you a new throttle.
Oh, the dream.
Throttle tubes.
Sure.
I brought you a throttle cable, and I brought
Nice.
you a Go Fast carburetor.
No ways.
I
The
felt
dream.
like you did
The dream.
No ways.
All within budget, just saying.
Performance.
No ways. China Motors spares.
China Motors, yes, China.
Seb on gasket cleaning duties.
The best, yeah.
Yeah.
He's loving every minute. He said it just before we started.
We stretch time, we stretch life, we stretch time, we stretch life.
In that groove. That oil ring is like seized in there, like that's why she's smoking so bad. The rings actually aren't in horrendous shape. It's just the oil ring's not doing a job. So, that's alright.
Take your word for it.
New piston. New piston. Woohoo!
We stretch time, we stretch life, we stretch time, we stretch life.
Welcome to your new home.
Alright, that's all we got time for in this one. I hope you liked the video. In the next one, we're going to look at putting the head tube or welding the head tube to the rest of the frame, as well as hopefully riding the bike. So if you enjoyed these videos, please consider subscribing, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot.